Padre Pio looked at a man in the confessional and said, "I can see every door you have opened through your eyes. 5 of them are still open right now, and something is standing in each one." The man froze. He had not committed any great sin. He had not stolen. He had not harmed anyone. He went to Mass every Sunday, said his prayers every night, and considered himself a decent Catholic. But Padre Pio could see something this man could not. He could see that this man's eyes had become doors, not metaphorical doors, real spiritual openings through which things had been entering and leaving his soul every day for over 20 years. And the 5 doors that were still open at that very moment in the confessional were not doors that the man had opened through some dramatic act of evil. He had opened them through the most ordinary, everyday acts of looking, things he did without thinking, things you probably do too. Padre Pio warned about this more than almost any other spiritual danger. He warned about it more than he warned about gossip, more than he warned about anger, more than he warned about missing Mass. Because Padre Pio could see what no one else could see. He could see, with a clarity that made him weep, the spiritual residue of what people had been looking at, clinging to their souls like smoke clings to clothing after you have sat too close to a fire. And what he saw terrified him. Not because people were committing terrible sins with their eyes, but because people had no idea, absolutely no idea, that their eyes were even capable of what he was witnessing. If you have ever felt spiritually heavy for no apparent reason, if you have ever felt drained after spending hours looking at something that seemed harmless, if your children have nightmares you cannot explain, if your home feels darker in the evenings than it should, then what I'm about to share with you is not just a video. It is a warning that could change the spiritual trajectory of your entire family. Let me tell you something most people do not realize. Your eyes are not just organs of biological sight. They are the most unguarded entrance to your soul. Every single day, from the moment you open them in the morning to the moment you close them at night, things pass through your eyes that you do not notice, that you do not filter, that you do not defend against. And Padre Pio understood this better than perhaps any saint in the last 500 years. Because he did not just believe it theologically, he could see it with his own spiritual vision. He could literally see the doors, and what he taught about those doors, the 5 specific types of spiritual openings that the human eye creates, has never been compiled and presented the way I am about to present it to you today. The year was 1955. Cerignola, a sun-baked town in the Puglia region of southern Italy, known for its olive groves and its ancient cathedral dedicated to St. Peter the Apostle. Renato Carbone was 38 years old, a cinema projectionist who ran the only movie theater in the town center. It was called Cinema Paradiso, though there was nothing paradisiacal about the cramped projection booth where Renato spent 6 nights a week, threading reels of film through the old Prevost projector and watching each movie dozens of times through the small window that looked out over the audience below. Renato was a Catholic, not a devout one, but a cultural one, the way most Italian men of his generation were Catholic. He attended Mass on Sundays because his wife Assunta expected it. He said grace before meals because his mother had trained it into him as a boy. He wore a small medal of the Madonna around his neck because his grandmother had placed it there when he was baptized and he had never taken it off. But his faith was a habit, not a conviction, a costume, not a calling. His wife Assunta, a quiet woman with dark eyes and calloused hands from years of laundry and cooking, had noticed changes in Renato that she could not explain. Not dramatic changes. Not the kind of change that gives you grounds to confront someone. The kind of change that creeps in so slowly you wonder if you are imagining it. Renato had always been warm with the children, their daughter Angelina, who was 10, and their son Filippo, who was 7. But over the past 2 years, something had dimmed behind his eyes. He came home from the cinema at midnight or later, sat at the kitchen table in the dark, and stared at nothing. He stopped telling Filippo bedtime stories. He stopped laughing at Angelina's drawings. He went through the motions of family life the way a man walks through a house he no longer recognizes as his own. Then the nightmares started. Not for Renato, for Filippo. The boy began waking at 2 or 3 in the morning, screaming about a tall man standing at the foot of his bed. A man with no face, a man whose eyes were holes. Assunta would rush in, hold Filippo, pray the Hail Mary until the trembling stopped. She took Filippo to the parish priest, who blessed him with holy water and told Assunta it was just a child's imagination. But the nightmares did not stop. They got worse. Filippo began describing details that a 7-year-old in 1955 should not have been able to describe. Scenes of violence, scenes of darkness, scenes that matched with sickening accuracy the content of the films Renato had been projecting every night. Assunta was frightened, not of Filippo's nightmares specifically, but of the connection she felt but could not prove. How could what Renato watched at the cinema show up in their son's dreams? They slept in different rooms. The cinema was 3 streets away. There was no logical, physical connection. But Assunta was a woman who prayed, and when logic failed, she turned to faith. She convinced Renato, after weeks of arguing, to make the trip to San Giovanni Rotondo to see Padre Pio. Not for himself, Renato insisted, for the boy, for Filippo. They arrived at the Friary of Our Lady of Grace on a Tuesday morning in October. The line for the confessional stretched from the church door to the stone wall of the courtyard. They waited 7 hours. When Renato finally knelt in the confessional, he began to recite a standard list of minor sins. I have been impatient with my wife. I have missed evening prayers. I have used the Lord's name carelessly. Padre Pio cut him off. "Stop," he said. His voice was not angry, it was grieved, as if he were looking at a wound that had been left untreated for so long that the infection had spread to places the patient could not feel. "Stop telling me what your mouth has done. Tell me what your eyes have done." Renato did not understand. "My eyes? What do you mean?" Padre Pio was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke words that Renato would remember for the rest of his life. "Your eyes are doors, Renato, and you have left 5 of them wide open every night for years. Do you know what has walked through those doors? Do you know what is living in your house now because of what you have watched? Your son's nightmares are not imagination, they are the overflow. What enters through the father's eyes does not stay contained in the father's soul. It spills over into the wife, into the children, into the walls of the house itself." Renato began to tremble, not because he believed immediately, but because something in Padre Pio's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, the weight of a man who was not guessing, who was not theorizing, who was seeing. And then Padre Pio did something he rarely did in the confessional. He stopped hearing the confession and began to teach. He told Renato to listen carefully, because what he was about to explain would determine whether his family survived the next year spiritually intact. Hold on, because what Padre Pio taught Renato in that confessional about the 5 doors of the eyes is something that every Catholic alive today desperately needs to understand. And the reason most people have never heard this teaching is not because it was hidden or suppressed. It is because it is too uncomfortable. It indicts too many daily habits that people do not want to examine. Padre Pio explained that the human eye is not simply a biological instrument that receives light and translates it into images for the brain. In the spiritual world, the eye is a porta bidirezionale, a 2-way door. Things do not just pass from the outside world into your soul through your eyes. Things also pass from the spiritual world into your physical life through the openings your eyes create. Every act of voluntary looking, every choice to fix your gaze on something, opens a door. Most of those doors close immediately when you look away, But some doors, opened repeatedly or opened to certain types of content, become stuck open. They develop what Padre Pio called cardini arrugginiti, rusted hinges. And a door with rusted hinges does not close when you turn away. It stays open in the dark while you sleep. Padre Pio identified 5 specific types of doors that the eyes can open. He called them le cinque porte degli occhi, the 5 doors of the eyes. And he told Renato that on that day, in that confessional, he could see all 5 standing open in Renato's soul simultaneously. What I am about to describe is not metaphor. Padre Pio experienced these doors as real structures in the spiritual anatomy of the human soul, as real and as visible to his spiritual sight as the wooden door of the confessional was to his physical eyes. The first door is la porta della concupiscenza, the door of desire. This door opens when you look at another person or an image with lust, with hunger, with the intention to possess visually what you have no right to possess. Padre Pio said, this door opens the widest and rusts the fastest of all 5. A single deliberate look of lust can create an opening that takes weeks of prayer and sacramental confession to close. And this door, once rusted open, acts as a beacon in the spiritual world. It sends out a signal, invisible to the person but blindingly obvious to the spiritual realm, announcing that there is an unguarded entrance, that the soul behind those eyes has lowered its defenses and is available for approach. Padre Pio told Renato that this first door had been open in his soul for so long that the hinge had not merely rusted, but had fused permanently to the frame. The films Renato projected night after night contained scenes that any Catholic of that era would recognize as occasions of sin, and Renato had watched them not once, but dozens of times, hundreds of times. Each viewing widened the door a fraction more. Each viewing corroded the hinge further, until the door could no longer close, even when Renato was sleeping, even when he was in church, even when he was holding his rosary at Mass. The second door is la porta dell'invidia, the door of envy. This opens when you look at what others have with covetousness, when you see your neighbor's house, your colleague's success, your relative's happiness, and instead of rejoicing with them, your eyes become instruments of comparison and resentment. Padre Pio said this door is the most common in Catholic communities because it hides behind the appearance of admiration. You tell yourself you are simply noticing, simply observing. But in the spiritual world, Padre Pio could see the difference between an eye that observes with joy and an eye that observes with hunger. The envious eye creates an opening through which spirits of discontent enter and slowly poison every good thing in your own life. The third door is la porta del giudizio, the door of judgment. This opens when you look at another person, not to understand them, but to condemn them. When you scan someone's appearance, their behavior, their family, their choices, and your eyes become a courtroom in which you serve as judge, jury, and executioner. Padre Pio said this was the door most frequently open in the souls of people who considered themselves devout. Because devout people often believe, their spiritual knowledge gives them the right to evaluate others. But the eye that judges opens a door through which the same judgment returns. Padre Pio called it il tribunale invertito, the inverted tribunal. You judge others through your eyes, and through those same open doors, you yourself are judged by forces that are far less merciful than you are. This changed everything for me when I first heard it explained this way. I thought about all the times I had looked at people in my parish, at the checkout counter, in the street, and silently assessed them, their clothing, their children's behavior, their apparent devotion or lack of it, and I realized with a sick feeling in my stomach that every single one of those assessments had opened a door. Not in them, in me. I was the one being invaded, not them. They walked away unaware. I walked away with another door standing open in my soul. The fourth door is La Porta della Curiosità Morbosa, the door of morbid curiosity. This opens when you look at things that feed darkness rather than light. Violence, horror, death, the occult, scandal, tragedy consumed not with compassion, but with fascination. Padre Pio said this is the door that the modern world holds open widest, because the modern world is built on spectacle, on the endless parade of images designed to shock, to horrify, to mesmerize. And every time you fix your gaze on these spectacles, you open a door to something that wants to show you much worse things in private, in the dark, in your dreams. He told Renato that the films he projected every night, the war films, the crime dramas, the suspense stories filled with violence and moral ambiguity, had opened this fourth door so wide that what was coming through was not merely spiritual residue. It was active presence. Something had taken up residence behind that door. And it was this presence that was projecting images into Filippo's sleeping mind. Not through any physical mechanism, through the spiritual corridor that connected father to son, through the bond of family. The fifth and final door is La Porta della Disperazione, the door of despair. This opens when you refuse to look at God, when you refuse to look at beauty, at hope, at mercy. When your eyes become fixed on darkness not because you are fascinated by it, but because you have given up on the light. Padre Pio said this is the rarest door, but also the most dangerous, because once it opens, it is nearly impossible to close from the inside. A person trapped behind the door of despair cannot even see that there is a door to close. They believe the darkness is all there is. They believe there is nothing else to look at. Padre Pio told Renato that this fifth door was beginning to open, not yet fully, but the crack was there. The dimming that Assunta had noticed behind Renato's eyes, the slow withdrawal from his children, the midnight staring at nothing in the kitchen, these were the early symptoms of a soul whose door of despair was starting to swing inward. 5 doors, all open, all rusted, all letting things into Renato's soul that were then spilling over into his wife, his daughter, his 7-year-old son, who screamed at a faceless man standing at the foot of his bed every night. But here is what Padre Pio said next, that nobody expected. Here is the detail that transforms this from a terrifying diagnosis into a message of hope. He said, "Renato, do you know why I can see your doors? Do you know how I know they are open?" Renato shook his head. "Because I can also see God standing behind every single one of them, waiting to close them. He has been waiting for years. He has been standing behind each door, his hand on the handle, ready to pull it shut the moment you give him permission. The problem was never that God could not close your doors. The problem was that you never asked him to. You never even knew they were open. And God, in his infinite respect for your freedom, will not close a door that you have chosen to open. He waits to be invited. I've seen it with my own eyes. Years ago in Coventry, a man in our parish came to the prayer group and confessed that he had been consuming violent and impure content for years. He was ashamed. He thought God would reject him. But when we prayed over him, specifically asking God to close the doors of his eyes, something physically changed in his face. The tension left. The darkness around his eyes, and I mean a visible shadow that I had noticed for months without understanding what it was, seemed to lift. 2 weeks later, his wife told me that their home felt different, lighter, like someone had opened all the windows on the first day of spring. Now listen carefully, because the practical application of what I'm telling you could change your family's spiritual life starting tonight. Padre Pio gave Renato a specific set of instructions, not vague spiritual advice, concrete, practical steps to close the 5 doors of the eyes. He called it La Custodia degli Occhi, the custody of the eyes. and he considered it one of the most essential spiritual disciplines that modern Catholics have almost entirely abandoned. But first, here is what happened to Renato when he did not follow the instructions immediately. And this is the part of the story that should make you act tonight rather than waiting until tomorrow. Renato left the confessional shaken but not yet converted. He heard Padre Pio's words. He understood them intellectually, but he did not act. He went home to Cerignola. He told Assunta that Padre Pio had prayed for Filippo and everything would be fine. He did not mention the 5 doors. He did not mention the projection booth. He went back to work the next night, and that is when the unexpected consequence struck with full force. Within 2 weeks, Filippo's nightmares expanded from the faceless man to elaborate scenes of destruction. The boy began describing specific images that matched specific films Renato had projected that very same week. Images the boy had never seen, could never have seen. He was 7 years old. He had never been inside the cinema. But the images that entered through his father's open doors were flowing downhill through the family bond, like poison flowing downhill through a stream. Then Angelina was affected, not nightmares. Angelina, who had been a joyful, artistic, deeply sensitive girl, became suddenly and inexplicably afraid of churches. She would not enter the parish church. She said the statues were watching her. She said the eyes of the saints on the walls followed her around the room. The door of judgment that Renato had opened through years of silently evaluating every character in every film was now distorting his daughter's ability to experience sacred images. What should have been comfort had become surveillance. What should have been love had become judgment. Assunta, the faithful wife who had dragged Renato to San Giovanni Rotondo, was the last to be affected. But when the effect came, it was the most devastating. She began losing her ability to pray, not her desire. Her ability. She would kneel, close her eyes, and see only darkness. No image of Christ, no sense of Mary's presence, nothing but the void. The door of despair that had begun to crack open in Renato was now seeping through their marriage bond into Assunta's prayer life. Renato watched his family disintegrate from the inside. And finally, he understood what Padre Pio had been trying to tell him. He traveled back to San Giovanni Rotondo alone this time. He did not wait in the confessional line. He knelt at the foot of the altar in the church and wept until Padre Pio found him there at dawn. "You came back," Padre Pio said simply. "I have destroyed my family with my eyes," Renato whispered. "No," Padre Pio said. "You have opened doors with your eyes. Now we are going to close them, and God is going to heal what came through while they were open. This is what truly matters, and I need you to hear this not just as a story about a man in 1955, but as a direct instruction for your life tonight." Padre Pio's instructions for the custody of the eyes were specific, practical, and designed to be implemented immediately, not next week, not after confession on Saturday, tonight. The first instruction, the evening examination. Every night before bed, before you close your eyes for sleep, review what your eyes have looked at that day. Not a general review, a specific one. What did you look at voluntarily? What images did you choose to consume? What did you watch on a screen? What did you stare at? What did you gaze at that you should have looked away from? Padre Pio told Renato that this examination takes less than 2 minutes, but those 2 minutes create awareness. And awareness is the first step to closing doors, because you cannot close a door you do not know is open. The second instruction, the prayer of custody. After the examination, pray specifically for the closing of any doors you opened that day. Padre Pio gave Renato these words, though he said the exact wording matters less than the intention. "Lord Jesus Christ, I confess that today I opened doors through my eyes that should have remained closed. I looked at things that invited darkness. I ask you now, with full authority as your baptized child, to close every door my eyes opened today. Seal them with your precious blood. Station your angels at each threshold, and let nothing that entered through those doors remain in my soul, my home, or my family. The third instruction, the morning consecration. Before opening your eyes each morning, before looking at anything, pray a single sentence of dedication. Lord, I consecrate my eyes to you today. Let them see only what you want me to see. This takes 5 seconds, but Padre Pio said it changes the entire spiritual posture of your eyes for the day. It puts God at the threshold of every door before you even begin to open them. The fourth instruction, the immediate aversion. When you encounter something your eyes should not look at, do not fight the temptation to look. Simply look away immediately and say the name of Mary, not a full prayer, just her name. Maria. Padre Pio said the name of Mary, spoken in the moment of temptation, slams doors shut faster than any other spiritual mechanism, because Mary is the gate of heaven, and a gate controls what passes through. The fifth instruction, the weekly fast of the eyes. Choose 1 day per week in which you dramatically reduce what your eyes consume. No screens, no newspapers, no entertainment. Look only at the faces of your family, the pages of scripture, the beauty of nature, and the blessed sacrament if you can visit a church. Padre Pio said this weekly fast allows all 5 doors to close simultaneously and the hinges to begin losing their rust. Renato followed every instruction with the desperation of a man who understood that his family's survival depended on it. He quit the cinema, told the owner he was done, found work as a farmhand in the olive groves outside Cerignola, working alongside men who spoke little and prayed the Angelus at noon without embarrassment. The pay was less, the hours were longer. The work broke his back. But his eyes, for the first time in 20 years, were looking at earth and sky and olive branches and the faces of his children instead of the flickering images in a dark projection booth. Every night he did the examination. Every night he prayed the prayer of custody. Every morning before opening his eyes, he consecrated them. And every Friday he fasted from all images except the face of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament, walking to the parish church at dawn and sitting in silence before the tabernacle for an hour. The change did not come all at once. The first week, nothing seemed different. The second week, Assunta noticed that the kitchen felt lighter in the evenings. Not brighter, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from the air itself. Within 3 weeks, Filippo's nightmares stopped. Not gradually, completely. One night he simply slept through until morning. The faceless man never returned. Filippo never mentioned him again. Within a month, Angelina walked back into the parish church on her own, without being asked or dragged. She looked up at the statue of the Madonna, and instead of fear, she smiled. She told Assunta, "Mama, the Madonna's eyes are kind. They were always kind. I just could not see it before." Within 2 months, Assunta knelt to pray, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she saw light behind her closed eyelids. Not physical light, the light of presence, the light that tells you that God is there, that He never left, that He has been standing behind every door with His hand on the handle, waiting patiently for permission to close what should never have been opened. Renato told a Capuchin brother years later that the moment he knew his family was truly healed was the night he came home from the olive groves, sat at the kitchen table with the evening light coming through the window, and Filippo climbed into his lap and said, "Papa, tell me a story." And Renato, with eyes that were finally clean, looked at his son and wept. Not sad tears, clean tears, because for the first time in years, he could see Filippo clearly. Not through the haze of 1,000 images he should never have watched, not through the residue of rusted doors and spiritual smoke, but clearly, simply, the way a father is supposed to see his child, with eyes that have become doors to love rather than doors to darkness. Remember what Padre Pio told Renato in the confessional. God has been standing behind every door, waiting to close them. All you had to do was ask, Renato asked. And God answered with a speed and a completeness that left no doubt about who was really in charge of those doors all along. You just heard truths about spiritual warfare that took decades to emerge from the confessional testimonies of San Giovanni Rotondo. You now understand the 5 doors, the mechanism of spiritual contagion through family bonds, and the practical instructions Padre Pio gave for the custody of the eyes. This channel exists to bring these hidden teachings to light, to reach the families who are suffering without understanding why, who feel a heaviness they cannot name and a darkness they cannot explain. The Super Thanks button below this video is not a donation. It is your way of saying, keep bringing these truths to families who need them. You are not just a viewer. You are a protector of the truths that Padre Pio died to share. I'm going to tell you something now that I want you to take as seriously as anything you have ever heard in your life. Do not wait. Do not tell yourself you will think about this later. Do not file this away as interesting spiritual information that you will get around to applying when life is less busy. Tonight, before you close your eyes for sleep, do the evening examination Padre Pio taught Renato. Take 2 minutes. Review what your eyes consumed today. Every screen you looked at, every image you lingered on, every person you looked at with envy or judgment or desire. Name them honestly. Do not flinch. Do not minimize. Then pray the prayer of custody. Ask God to close every door you open today. Ask Him to seal them. Ask Him to station His angels. Then tomorrow morning, before you open your eyes, before you reach for your phone, before you look at a single thing, consecrate your eyes. 5 seconds. Lord, I consecrate my eyes to you today. And when I first started doing this myself, when I started the evening examination, after learning about Padre Pio's teaching on the custody of the eyes, I was horrified at what I found. I am 62 years old. I consider myself a devout Catholic. I pray the rosary every day. I go to weekly adoration. And yet, when I honestly reviewed what my eyes had consumed in a single ordinary Tuesday, I was ashamed. Hours on a screen. Images I did not need to see. News stories I consumed not out of compassion, but out of morbid curiosity. Faces of strangers I had silently judged in the supermarket without a second thought. 3 doors opened before lunch, and I had not noticed a single one. I began praying every evening for the doors to close. I began the morning consecration 5 seconds before opening my eyes each day. And the change in my home was immediate, not dramatic in the way you might expect, but immediate and real. A lightness in the rooms, a peace at dinner that had not been there before, my husband David sleeping more deeply than he had in months, my grandchildren calmer and more affectionate when they visited, as if they could sense, at some level below conscious awareness, that the atmosphere of our home had been filtered and cleaned of something that should not have been there. I tell you this, not because I am special. I tell you this because if it worked for a 62-year-old grandmother in Coventry, it will work for you. Padre Pio said something in the last years of his life that summarizes everything I have shared with you today. He said the eyes are the windows of the soul, but people forget that windows work in both directions. If you can see out, things can see in. Guard your windows. Guard them as you would guard the front door of your house if you knew there were wolves outside. Because in the spiritual world, there are always wolves outside, and they are always looking for an open door. Do not give them one, not tonight, not ever again. The custody of the eyes is not a suggestion from an old saint. It is a survival instruction for the modern world. And the 5 doors are not a metaphor. They are as real as the door to your bedroom, as real as the door to your children's room, as real as the darkness that waits on the other side of an unguarded gaze. Close them, tonight, now, before you sleep, and let Padre Pio's words ring in your soul until morning. Your eyes are doors. Choose what passes through them, because everything that enters through your eyes ends up in the eyes of those you love most. Padre Pio could see the spiritual doors in every person who knelt before him. He could see which ones were open, which ones were rusted, and which ones were guarded by angels. If he could see your doors right now, what would he find? Write "guarded" in the comments if you practice the custody of the eyes. Write "closing tonight" if this video made you realize you need to start. And tell us honestly, what is the one thing your eyes keep returning to that you know they should not? Your honesty might help someone else recognize their own open door.